Welcome to the Shaltazar Podcast. This is episode number 20, and I'm pleased to have as my guest Manya Welch from the UK. My geography isn't too great, so Manya, why don't you tell the listeners a bit about yourself, where you're from in the UK, a little bit about your personal history, your gifts, your art, and then we will see where our conversation goes.
Well, thank you so much, Jeffrey, for inviting me to be a guest on your podcast. I think what you do is absolutely wonderful, and I feel very honoured and humbled to be a guest on your podcast show today. So yes, my name is Manya Welch. I am an intuitive artist. So a little bit about my history. I was a naturally gifted psychic intuitive, so it's been with me all my life. But at the age of 9, I actually had a very interesting experience, and I'd caught my reflection as I walked past a mirror, and I was looking with my eyes, but through a human body. So I almost experienced myself as a separate entity from my physical self. And as a result of that, believing in the metaphysical became very naturally to me. I did struggle to understand the world around me when I was a child, and I was very withdrawn and introverted. So from a sense of being out of place and an only child, I would often escape into books and to painting. And so this connection that I've harnessed over the many years now with Source has always been through my artistic kind of abilities. And it's where I often go to kind of feel the most aligned. In 2011, I explored my own sort of spiritual gifts a little bit further. So at this point, I was connected. I had a lot of internal conversations, but with my higher self that were coming from Source, but I would never share these. So I had a very sort of quiet voice, so to speak. But in 2011, I started to give some readings, and I kind of started to explore my own spirituality a little bit further. And it was also around this time in 2011 where I came into contact with my twin flame. And that experience, although it wasn't meant to last, was actually what really heightened a full spiritual awakening. So all of my senses just really kind of were like almost like they were on steroids. I remembered feeling a very strong connection to Mother Earth, so much so that actually I felt very uncomfortable when I walked on tarmac. And for a while I had to try and stick to grass verges as much as possible. My third eye vision also just got very strong. So I would literally see waves of gold coming off my feet. I would be able to see the elemental world as well. It was like I could see beyond the veil into the different dimension. And I would see a lot of orbs that were just millions and millions just within the atmosphere. And as a result, my paintings also started to change at this point. And what I was then doing was actually starting to express pictures of nature, but using my third eye vision. And alongside that, I would get very strong messages that would come through as well, that were connected to the art pieces. And these were messages of hope and positivity and happiness, and peace and love. And as I started to develop that, it was around 2015, between 2009 and 2015, when my collection of work that was called Colourful Earth, that's where that collection actually came from. It was through my visionary aspect, using my third sight in order to see the nature around me, and it was accompanied with messages. So I often, what I see now through art is the way that art has that ability to help people find inspiration, you know, just from placing something within their environment that they're able to see all the time. And I believe that if you're able to continuously see something that gives you inspiration, it creates those positive emotions within yourself. And it's from those positive emotions that you actually get closer to connecting with Source. I obviously now have released a new collection called Spiritual Whimsical, and these are intuitively inspired paintings with images and colours that actually speak directly to the soul, and they convey things like peace and courage and happiness. So they will, again, it all comes down to the fact that they provide this focal point of inspiration for people. And it's really interesting how the emotions will uplift people. I mean, I've never come across somebody's home or venue that do not have a piece of artwork on the wall. So it's almost like it's a subtle access point for people who are not even sure if they're spiritual or not, but it's almost like you can plant that seed. It's an accessible way for everyone to start accessing those positive emotions, and positive emotions obviously lead to a connection with the higher self and with source. So I'm a firm believer that changes happen from within us, and that we all hold an extraordinary spiritual power which anybody can access, and it really all comes from a change in our mindset. So that's really where my art comes from and what I do. And I find what's interesting as well is that, you know, we are made up of like this spiritual essence within, and then we have our human life experience that is also happening. It's very easy to assume that these are two separate elements, but I don't see it like that. I think that we have ways where we can actually bring those together. So not only through my art do I try and help people along that journey and start accessing those more positive emotions, but I also run a vision board, intuitive art, and law of attraction workshops too. So I've come to realize as a light worker that I'm called to in service to help people that are really at that very beginning journey of their spirituality, and that they have this awareness that there is something that does exist, you know, beyond the physical almost. So, and I often find this kind of awakening process is actually sometimes the most challenging. It's almost like a roller coaster of emotions where they try to connect the dots to make sense of the internal, their difference in internal perspectives. But at the same time, you know, the external environment they live in is not changing. And that kind of, I think, can create a difficulty with people as they are kind of transitioning into a more spiritual awareness and to a more spiritual life. So I feel like I'm there to be able to kind of assist people in sort of bridging that gap almost, and helping them identify how throughout their everyday life they can still bring some sort of spiritual practice into it, no matter how busy their life is. And ultimately, the more connected you just become internally, then you actually end up in a state of calmness and tranquility, regardless of all the external things that are happening sort of around you. So that's how my journey started. Ultimately, it really came from an ability I had as a childhood. It kind of became into the art. And then obviously now, as I kind of learn, I have things that I'm able to share with people that hopefully are going to help. I've kind of branched out into doing some workshops.
Excellent, excellent. You raised some really interesting points, one of which I'd like to comment on, which is around your art. I have heard many times, and I happen to believe, that pure spirit is simply sound and light. And therefore, and I'm a big sound healing kind of fan. I love that. I've got crystal bowls, and I've participated in sound healing. But the light and the colors, I really believe that people's art is what triggers or brings us back to that spirit. There's a few messages from Shaltazar where they take us on this magical journey of seeing light of different colors and sound, and of course feeling the unconditional love. And I think that's why art is so unique and resonates so differently with different people, because of the light and the shape combination that can trigger a connection to our essence. And I just want to tell the listeners, I have seen Manya's art, and it's really fabulous. She will be sharing her website at the end of the episode, and it will be in the description of the podcast. I encourage you to have a look at it, and look at it with an open heart and an open mind, and see if it stirs your essence. The other point.
Thank you for that. Yes,
you're welcome.
I do believe that many sort of creative areas like music, like art, are actually very strongly connected to some sort of divine intervention with how the artist actually produces it. And definitely for me, as an intuitive artist, that really is the key to my process. So it's very important to me that the art I produce actually deeply resonates with the person. So I try and use images and colors that speak directly to them. And then I allow those kind of colourful energies and spiritual essences to kind of come alive and dance on the canvas. All my work is also it is accompanied with messages. So these messages I find will be relevant to the person when they get drawn to a specific image that I've done. But I also work on commission, so I can make it even more kind of bespoke. But having a piece of art that is something that deeply resonates with your soul, I think is something truly special. And you also see this with musicians and with music as well.
Absolutely. What I'd like to do is shift a little bit, because you told us how as a child you were very intuitive, you were very spiritual, but that wasn't as widely accepted or nurtured. So the first question is, please share with us what that was like for you growing up, where you knew you had this gift, this intuitive ability that was not only not nurtured, but possibly a little bit squashed in you. Any comments on that?
Yes. So although I was raised by a single mother, and although on my mum's side and my grandmother, they certainly were very open to spiritual beliefs. In fact, a lot of my talent actually does sort of come from that side of my family. But I felt like the inner wisdom that I might try to have expressed when I was a child just wasn't really fitting to come out of a mouth of someone so physically young. So I found that it wasn't heard. It was a little bit dismissed maybe when I wanted to say something or express myself. So I learned to kind of keep that quiet. I felt like for a long time I was almost just waiting for my physical self to grow into the inner wisdom voice that I felt like I'd always had as a child. And as an only child as well, obviously, I guess I was quite withdrawn, and I did spend a lot of time on my own, and I went more internal. But ultimately, that journey I went on has probably allowed me to keep my connection to source so strong, because I went into the painting and I expressed myself that way, and that was all the forms of expression that I was getting from my higher self. So therefore, after all these years of doing it, that's really helped strengthen it at the same time. What I had to learn as I went into adulthood, though, was to be comfortable to talk about it and to actually express it. And it's taken me many years to get to this point where I can easily stand up and actually say that I have these messages. This is my process for producing my art. Because I didn't do that for a very long time. I would share my art, and I dipped in and out of the public eye sharing art. And I would never talk about the messages that came with the paintings, or even the process of how I'd produced it. So it's taken me a long time to get to that point, and obviously that's all stemmed from the fact that I did feel like I wasn't able to really be myself completely throughout childhood, and I struggled a lot with forming relationships with my peers, and some of that could have been because I wasn't surrounded by people of my own age. I was an only child, so but I also would struggle just with the planet I was on, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I had a lot of confusion as to understanding how everything worked here. It did to me as a child, it felt very dense, and I felt very out of place and a little bit lost. And it was almost like I was pining for a home that I didn't really remember, but I still felt like I didn't really belong. So that was something else that kind of stayed with me. And then as a result, that was another reason why I retreated in myself a little bit.
And, a lot of people, some people have the popular misconception that when you go on this spiritual journey, it's all roses and beautiful and colored lights and everything is bliss. I think you would agree that that's the furthest from the truth. That your spiritual journey has its ups, has its downs. We have this gift, and we're not sure how to use it, and we don't know what it's all about, and we have this connection to an invisible world that others don't understand. So it can be very, very confusing very, very confusing. I want to ask you a question because now you have children, and there are some of our listeners, I'm sure, that are curious who have children. They have become a little bit awakened themselves, but have children that are very, very gifted. Shaltazar leads me to believe that the young people are coming into the planet at this time to help us shift our consciousness, to change, to move to a period of possibly greater awakening. What would your advice to those parents be to nurture those gifted children, as opposed to, in your case, where you had to sort of go it alone and figure it out later in life?
Well, I think the first thing is to listen to them and accept them for who they are. So if you do start recognizing that, then children often lead by example. So they may not fully understand that awareness within themselves yet, but as the parent, by you living a more spiritual life or implementing certain spiritual practices that even they just see you doing, even if they're too young to participate in themselves, then it's opening that opportunity up for them to then step forward when they find their voice, and they can talk to you about it openly. And then they can also be included, depending on how old they are, in the spiritual practices that they're seeing you undertake.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, in some cases, I would imagine that young children that are unfamiliar with what's going on will feel very frustrated and misunderstood, and often even act out. And so therefore there's this challenge for parents that you have this child that's acting out that could be very gifted and very spiritually connected, but from the human aspect, they're, let us use the word, misbehaving by societal standards. How do how would you connect with those children that are so frustrated and not understanding what's coming through them?
Yes, I think I have one of those children in mine. So my eldest child is 4, and when he was a baby, he would always look above a person's head. So it was very obvious to both me and my husband that he was able to see auras. Always. He would always start at the top of their head before he would come down to their eye level. And he did that from a very, very young age. I mean, like from months old. He's now 4, and we are experiencing this where he's very emotional, but he's also highly sensitive. But the way he expresses himself comes out more in challenging behavior. Now, I often find as a sort of a spiritual parent that having children is actually the perfect opportunity for you to really implement some of your spiritual practices. So the first thing I find is that obviously you never approach a child like that in anything other than a state of calmness yourself, because you don't want to be fueling that agitation. And I often find that by just speaking calmly to him, he will then come to me when he's ready in his own time and want to talk. There's obviously the fine line between allowing and accepting certain behaviors, but again, it's being firm but fair at the same time, because they do have to be able to adjust to some extent in living within society and learn kind of those interpersonal skills. But it's a very fine line. But generally, I find having had my children has actually been a wonderful way for me to actually embrace spirituality a little bit more, which sounds very strange because, obviously when you have children, you consider your life to be so much busier. There's so much more logistics, planning, and you almost feel like I don't have time for spiritual practice. But actually, children are there to remind you about how to release the inner child that's actually within yourself and what they can provide in the way that they love you unconditionally. And just through that innocence and seeing things and experience things for the first time can really ignite something within you. And setting your inner child free is also a wonderful way to kind of connect yourself better, with Source.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's so difficult sometimes for parents, even if they are spiritual and somewhat awakened, that they have this belief that they have to be the parent, they have to be the boss, they have to be the teacher. And sometimes as parents, it's important to realize that you are the student as well, and that your child may be your child in this lifetime, but could have been your guru, your master, your teacher, your parent in another lifetime. So
absolutely, yeah. Do you know, the way I view like the children that I have really is I'm more like the guardian of their soul at the moment while they're small. I don't see, that's how I view it, and that's something that, you know, I respect them for who they are and that they are an individual. I also respect the fact that all my children are older souls. You know, they have that inner wisdom and knowledge within them. And as a guardian just of their physical being while they're here, it's to help them adjust into kind of the world and planet Earth as they find it now, and actually learn to how to kind of navigate this human life experience and set sort of some things in place that is going to allow them to cope when they get into adulthood. But I definitely view it more as the guardian of their soul.
beautiful. Oh, so nicely put. Thank you for that, Manya. That's amazing. How many children do you have?
I have 3 children. So my eldest is 4, my middle son is nearly 3, and my youngest is 16 months.
So you have a pretty important job of the guardian of the souls of 3 beautiful young people. And so, and I find it very interesting that you were trained from this because of the experience you had growing up, being an only child, first of all, and second of all, one who maybe wasn't able to have their spiritual gifts nurtured as much as she could. It's fabulous that it didn't get snuffed out. It's fabulous that you made this comeback. And now it's tremendously fabulous that you get to use your experience growing up to be an even better guardian of the souls of your children.
Oh, well, thank you for that. I see it as a very important role, really, and I think that we've been blessed with some very spiritual children as well. And there's often times where me and my husband can both see some past life things coming through to our children, especially our middle son, who sort of does things just within his movements, which we're just like, where did that come from? Where has he seen that? Why is he doing that? And it's really interesting. And I'm lucky as well in that me and my husband share very sort of similar beliefs. So we're both very spiritual people. And therefore, for us anyway, it's very important that we are nurturing the spirituality within these kind of little souls that have come to join us and for this lifetime have chosen us to be their parents. And my experience as a child has definitely shaped who I am as an adult and also who I am becoming as a parent. So I find that I never look back and, you know, wish things would have been different, because for me, it's who I am now. And I'm very kind of come to terms with who I am now. I'm very accepting of who I've become now. And my spirituality has obviously helped me along the way. And I was fortunate enough that I always had a very strong sense of my spirituality throughout my entire life.
Mm-hmm. And help me with this one. And I know we talked a little bit about it when I was getting to know you, but what's your advice to parents that also have not only the job, the very important job of being the guardians of the souls of their children, but a mother, a wife, possibly having a career, the busyness of everyday life, and yet we still have to take on this important role of being the guardian of the souls. So, and I know you are very, very busy as well. Any advice to the listeners on how you juggle all of those roles that you have to play and still keep your grounded sense of spirituality and be there for your husband and be there for your kids, your families, your friends, and the world at large?
I think, yes, I think all parents can relate to just how much busier life does tend to get when you have children, regardless of their age, really. It's very, it does change a lot, and you look back and think, wow, what did I do with all my time before? Well, the first thing, obviously, is that because time is precious, you realize how much you can fit into a very short space of time. So, for example, you know, if you think, oh, I've got 10 minutes before I have to go and do this or collect the child from school or something, then when you set an intention, it's amazing what you can actually achieve or do just within that 10 minutes. So what I try and do in order to keep the sort of spiritual essence of my human life experience in flow throughout my day is I actually have a vision board in my kitchen, and the children are looking at it all the time and they love looking at the pictures. But for me, the vision board is something that I will focus on just when the kettle's boiling, when I'm cooking food. And it's something then I can just, even for a few seconds, just put myself in that moment of then bringing or manifesting something into my reality. So that's one way I do it. I just have something in the kitchen. It is the place I spend a lot of time in. So if anyone has more than one child, I think you may be familiar with how many snacks you end up doing and the cooking of the meals and getting juice and water. So it's a good place for me to put it. It also allows me to share it with the children. So they're always looking at the pictures. They absolutely love seeing. I've got pictures of them on there. I've got pictures of holidays I'd love to do with them. So they're always looking at it as well. And this is one way where, as they grow older, you see, I'm already starting to show through my own. I'm showing them through example as well. So it'll be something they become familiar with and potentially then go on to use themselves as they get older. Mm-hmm. The other thing that I do as well is I will see things for the first time, the way that they see things. And this is like the simple things. The way that a child will use the crayon for the very first time on a piece of paper, and that utter delight. So my daughter was doing this recently. The sheer joy and delight on her face when she sees the colour of the crayon being marked on a paper, for her that was magic. And what happens as we get older, I think, is that things are so familiar, we kind of lose the sight of how it would feel or experience if we were seeing it or doing it for the very first time. And this is something that you're able to relive with your children. And that moment of actually appreciating the very simple things is also another sort of spiritual aspect where I'm bringing that feelings again back into my own experience. And that's a very spiritual thing as well. Mm-hmm. The other things that I do is that in the morning, it's very rushed. But even when I'm just getting a quick coffee, if I manage to squeeze one in, I will deliberately create my intention for the day, even mentally, even if I don't have time just to write it down. And when I go to bed at night, then I will also be mindful of my mindset. So when I go to bed, I won't be identifying how many hours sleep I'll have. I don't go to bed and go, right, oh gosh, I'm only going to get 5 hours. I'm going to be tired in the morning, because then automatically I'm setting a negative intention of assuming I'm going to wake up feeling exhausted or tired. So I actually don't look or count the hours on the clock, when I go to bed. So there's different things that I do that come into with like my mindset more so. But obviously, these are all aspects of spiritual practice that can be achieved throughout the day. When I'm driving in the car, for example, I will listen to an audiobook, a spiritual audiobook of some kind. So I'll fit in a little bit of kind of knowledge transfer, learn something new, and I'll do that as well.
Thank you. Your advice is so practical and so amazing. And as you're talking, I'm thinking, because I know not everyone in our audience is a parent, that advice is very appropriate to all of us. I'm 67 years old, I'm an old guy, and I'm listening to what Manya's saying, and it's like, yeah, okay. I mean, how many times do I go to bed at night and think about how many hours I'm going to get of sleep, or how many times I'm wasting time waiting for the kettle to boil, where I could be becoming more mindful, allowing myself to connect for that moment to my higher self. So some excellent advice. I do hope everyone listens to this and realizes that it's appropriate recommendations for all of us, not just parents. Manya, I think we're
absolutely, Jeffrey, because really everybody has a busy life. You know, there are a lot of people that have kind of very stressful jobs, for example, and they may have this kind of spiritual awareness within themselves, but be struggling to bridge that gap. And it's interesting that you say that, because I'm actually putting together an ebook which is called Bridging the Gap, where it identifies, you know, these little hints and tips of how you can actually implement spiritual practices within the human life experience and a busy day. And I think this is where people fall short sometimes, or maybe don't develop their spirituality because they're always waiting for time, having enough time to do something. And I don't think that needs to be the case. I think there are plenty of things that you can just do throughout the day that literally just take minutes.
I think that's an excellent idea. And please tell the listeners, we are running out of time, and I know we could chat for a lot longer. I loved your tips. I loved your stories, and we covered a little bit about your art, and then we got into becoming a conscious parent and becoming a conscious person. When do you expect that ebook to be out, Manya?
It's due to be out beginning of December, and it will be available on Amazon. In the meantime, obviously people can head over to my website and actually sign up through the email subscription to get any notifications of when it is going to be released, so they don't miss out if they are interested. And obviously they're able to get in touch with me from there regarding any intuitive art that they feel like they may like to have in their home or their venues.
Excellent. And your website is?
So my website is www.manyawelch.com. And I have an email address as well, which is info@manyawelch.com. Excellent.
I recommend everyone getting in touch with Manya to be on the list for that ebook. I will get a copy myself, and also to check out that intuitive art. You've been a fabulous guest. Any last words that you have for the listeners?
I just wish them all very well on their spiritual journey, and if there's anything that I can help with, then I would love people to reach out to me. That's what I feel like I'm here to do. So it would be great to hear back from people, and I just want to thank you, Jeffrey, for actually having me as a guest on your podcast as well.
It has been my pleasure, and I will tell the listeners that Manya is extremely approachable. I met her on social media. We connected. She is in the UK. Whereabouts in the UK are you, Manya?
I'm in Worcestershire in the West Midlands.
Right. I will not attempt to pronounce that because I'm sure that I will not be able to do it as eloquently as you. Reach out to Manya. She's extremely approachable. Thank you for being a phenomenal guest, and I'd love to have you back again. This is the Shaltazar Podcast. My name, once again, is Jeffrey Eisen. I am a spiritual life coach, the channeler of Shaltazar, and an energy intuitive. If you would like to be a guest on the Shaltazar Podcast, please drop me a message at jeffrey@jeffreyeisen.com. I would love to chat with you and have you as a guest. I really enjoy doing these podcasts and sharing the wisdom of my guests with the world. Check out my website, jeffreyeisen.com. There's lots of information there, lots of sharing. I've started a new blog series with a friend that I found on the application, on the meditation application called Insight Timer. Mark Lane is his name. He's a great writer, and he's working with me to help share the messages of Shaltazar in a very eloquent way. Thank you all, listeners, once again. I really appreciate you listening. Love and light to you all. Thank you.